Pentagon officials say proposed budget cuts could severely harm the military. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, he said about $500 billion in automatic budget cuts scheduled to take effect over the next decade could leave the nation in a much more weakened position. Now, if Congress doesn't act to avoid the cuts, the Pentagon may be forced to cut the number of Navy aircraft carriers strike groups from 11 down to 8, and the troop cuts could slice the Army back to levels not seen since 1940. As the Washington Post editorial board put it, the Defense Department would have to choose between maintaining technological sophistication or numerical strength. Deputy Secretary Ashton Carter said that either option would, quote, mark a significant departure from the missions that our nation has been accustomed to being able to accomplish. Now, earlier this week, the Pentagon announced that it will reduce the number of furlough days for civilian employees from 11 to 6 days, and defense officials found other ways to make the budget cuts mandated by sequestration. Now, in a statement on Tuesday, Hagel, he reiterated the Defense Department continues to face real financial challenges. All right. Now, I know liars figure, figures lie, and you can move around a lot of numbers, but Mark, there is a non-debatable fact in terms of how big our military was post-World War II, but even more recently, if you go back 30, 40 years ago, in terms of the amount of men that we had boots on the ground or available to us versus now. And yes, you have a drawdown in Afghanistan, Iraq. Hopefully our presence in the theaters gets reduced. But then it brings up the bigger issue. You know, 12 years ago, we couldn't have forecasted exactly where we would have been. The world is changing before our eyes. If we do this, we should at least be honest that there are consequences that get attached to it, right?
There are tons of consequences, and I have so many ideas that I want to bring to the table. I used to teach national security and actually worked in the Pentagon in the strategic planning cell of the Army. So I have a lot of strong opinions, and I saw a lot of bloat, a lot of fat that could be cut. So in my going in position is we need to cut and make the military more efficient. All right. That said, in the context of all that's going on to our left and right, it needs to be done smartly. The sequester is dumb, right? And not only is it dumb,
and not to interrupt you, but if people think that it's just this word game, shell game, they should spend a day up at West Point. Well, and the idea of what happens at one of the best things that this country's about in our academies, I think they'd walk away with a different opinion.
It's a very good, I have a real world example. My son just entered West Point. He's doing new cadet training this summer, right now. And they are cutting back on his training because they are cutting in places to make it hurt for political reasons. And I've seen the old game. Said, look at all these cuts are going to cause us to reduce carriers. They said that when I was there in the late 90s, all right? Or we're going to cut back on modernization. That said, we have to cut nationally, and the head of the chief of the help me out here.
What are you talking about? When Hagel?
Council,
yeah.
The council,
yeah.
Basically said that it is a national security crisis, that our spending is out of control. The economy, the weakness of the economy is a greater threat to our security than these specific cuts. All right, we have to get that under control. All of that said, if we don't do this smart, we could see things get gutted because the politics will enter in. You'll see the Army get gutted. You'll see officers laid off. You'll see carriers. And I would argue that it's because it's not being smart. We need a national security strategy that decides this is the force we need, and this is how we would fund it. It's a non-political approach.
But I've heard, and it's always interesting, it's some of the neocons who never put a uniform on, or it's some of the bureaucrats who talk a good game, but they talk anecdotally, and when you know better than I about waste and maybe mismanagement, certainly when you're divvying up the budgets, but there is a difference to have 1.3 million in terms of servicemen and women versus 2 million people. I mean, we ran into a little bit of this even when we were trying to figure out what to do with Iraq, where Shinseki said, you're going to need a multiple of what they're saying. It turned out to be right in retrospect. But my point is, whether we should or shouldn't be the policemen of the world, people can debate that till the cows come home. I'm not going to try that debate tonight. But you can't have it all. You can't have on a shoestring, maybe the wrong analogy, but on a far reduced budget, and then be able to be in different corners of the world, where the hotspots are. When people in Washington just say, yes, we need to have a presence there, we need to get into Syria, whatever else. You can't have it all.
I did some research prior to this program, and our budget is roughly $600 billion DoD. When I was serving the Pentagon in the late 90s, it was about $400 billion inflation adjusted. $400 billion, all right? And if you adjust for inflation, what we're spending now is about the same as we spent in the mid-'80s, and actually we spent more inflation adjusted in Vietnam. So we need to be a great nation. We need to get our economy working again so we can fund this stuff and not worry about these things.
And also take care of the guys and when they come back.
Absolutely.
I mean, which we're not.
No, my point is I've spent 8 years in the Army. Certainly didn't spend any time in the Pentagon, but from what I've seen is just on the ground using old equipment, training being cut, and and that was in the early 2000s I was in the Army. But we went from a force that was able to fight 2 big wars to one that was easily deployed over. So we've certainly, I think, become more efficient in that respect. We don't have a lot of bases around the world. We close a lot of bases, both around the world and here locally. And bases.
No.
We've diminished our bases
it's a fraction
over the
what
years.
It was. And look at, a lot of the bases were, in Japan. We've had them in Europe. This is obviously
But even
post-World War II.
stateside.
You can debate that maybe we didn't need to be in all those places, but
Right.
domestically, we have a fraction of what we used to have.
Exactly, and stateside. But that's a big economy too. When you close a base, that's tens of thousands of employees, so civilian and military also. So there is a lot of politics in it. But yeah, I agree. We have to decide what's the Army of the future, what's the military of the future going to do. Are we going to go and come into countries and attack and then leave?
Build, yeah.
Are we going to nation build? What are we going to do? Are we just going to protect the homeland? That's what we have to figure out and be more efficient about.
And Rich, I know you said that's, whether we should be the policeman of the world is a debate that we could have on another day, but I think it's the crux of this entire debate, which is what exactly is the role of our military? Do we need a military that can conduct 2 large wars at the same time? Do we want to continue being the policeman of the world? Yes, I know we want to be able to spread our influence and control our enemies at a moment's notice, but the Deputy Defense Secretary, that quote, the departure from the missions our nation has been accustomed to being able to accomplish. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we need to think of a new role for our military or what our role is going to be in the overall role.
I don't know how, but I've assumed the role of the hawk here at the table, I guess. But to me, I think the consequence of Iraq was a war that everybody in retrospect, or vast majority said, wasn't well thought out and wasn't the right war. God forbid all hell breaks loose and it's Israel, and all of a sudden, then there'll be a different tune in this country, I think. And then if we don't have the wherewithal or the choice to be able to have an active role in a fight that we as a nation believe is a fight worth fighting, then the decision will be made for us. And I don't think, if history is a guide, and hopefully we'll never see World War III, but I just don't feel comfortable acceding that option. Now, maybe we can, and we should, have better discretion. Some of the enterprises that we go on, and I think we'll have learned as a nation, a country out of Iraq, I think you're 100% right. But to be able to not have that choice when it comes in front of us, that'd be the first time in my lifetime that we couldn't do that.
Keep in mind, Iraq and Afghanistan also happened in the shadow of 9/11 and Homeland Security spending, and that has shot up so exponentially that it's really like we fought 3 wars at the same time. We fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we were also building up for a war here.
But ask these guys, even if we want to, right now, before the cuts, we shouldn't be sending guys for 4 or 5 tours, right? That was part of the consequence of forget about our ambitions. Before even these cuts, we really couldn't do this. So you now take into account lessons learned from these 2 wars that we just conducted, and now you want to cut back on it? You're right, they can do it more smartly. But
the problem is the problem is it's a nuanced argument, all right? Because we need to get more streamlined and more efficient. But we need to fund the things that matter. We waste a lot, right? But in the context of what we spend, the big buckets are the unfunded obligations and who's attacking the entitlements? Who's trying to get those streamlined? That's the national crisis of the future that will hamstring our military
You'll
for
enjoy
decades.
this next conversation we're going to have, and that is about Obamacare. And if there were blurred lines in this last segment, I think you can probably figure out where we're going to go in the next one. Here's the question. While some on Capitol Hill and maybe even some people at this table want to keep on fighting Obamacare, governors right now have to make a decision. Are they going to opt in or opt out of expanding Medicare? And In doing so, are they making a political choice, maybe even over constituencies? And this is not some theoretical debate. This is happening right now across this country. We're going to get into that debate right after this.